Die! Die! Die!
The village of Achara was unlike any other place. Snakes lived everywhere in the village. They crawled through compounds, rested under trees, and slept in corners of homes. But nobody killed them. The people believed the snakes were protectors sent by their ancestors. The snakes were sacred. If someone accidentally killed a snake, the whole village would gather for a funeral. They would cry, pray, and bury the snake like a human being. But intentional killing was different. Intentional killing by a stranger was the worst abomination of all. Chike brought Neddy home on a Wednesday afternoon. She came from a different state where people killed snakes without thinking. Chike had spent most of his life in the city studying and working. He barely remembered the old village ways. He forgot to tell Neddy about the snakes. His parents welcomed her with open arms. His mother prepared her best soup with fish and vegetables. His father asked about her family and her work. They laughed together that evening. Neddy felt happy. These people would be good in-laws. She woke up early the next morning. She wanted to help with the housework. She found a broom by the door and started sweeping the compound. The sun was just coming up. That was when she saw it. A thick brown snake lay coiled near the wall. Neddy did not hesitate. She saw a machete leaning against the wall. She grabbed it and struck the snake hard. It died instantly. She felt proud. She had protected the household. She called out loudly, "Chaik, Mama, come and see what I killed." Chike's mother rushed outside first. When she saw the dead snake, all color left her face. She grabbed the wall to steady herself. Chike came running. He stopped dead when he saw the snake. The smile died on Neddy's face. A woman walking past the compound saw everything. She began to scream, "Abomination! A stranger has killed our protector." The woman's screams echoed across the village. Within minutes, people began pouring into the compound. They came from their farms, from the markets, from their homes. They all gathered around the dead snake with fear in their eyes. The elders arrived wearing their ceremonial beads and wrappers. They formed a circle around the snake's body. Some of them knelt down to examine it. Others began muttering prayers under their breath. The whole compound fell silent except for the sound of worried whispers. Okonkwo, the oldest man in the village, looked at Neddy with sad eyes. He turned to the other elders and shook his head slowly. They all understood what this meant. A stranger had intentionally killed a sacred snake. This was not an accident. This was the worst form of abomination their laws recognized. Chike tried to explain. He stepped forward with his hands raised, speaking quickly about how Neddy came from far away, how she did not know their customs, how she meant no harm. But the elders barely looked at him. The snake was dead. The stranger held the machete. The case was clear. Okonkwo gave the order. Neddy must be taken into custody immediately. She would be held at the house near the chief priest's compound until they decided what must be done. Chike moved to block their path. But 4 strong villagers grabbed his arms and pulled him back. He struggled against them, but they were too many. His mother held onto him, begging him not to make things worse. Neddy looked back at him with terrified eyes as they led her away. The elders walked toward the sacred shrine at the edge of the village. The chief priest waited for them there. They disappeared inside. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky and began its descent. Chike sat in his father's house with his head in his hands. He had lived most of his life in the city. He attended university there. He worked in an office with computers and modern thinking. But he had forgotten how deep the old beliefs ran in this village. He had forgotten that some traditions were not just stories. They were laws that people lived and died by. As evening came, the elders emerged from the shrine. The chief priest came out last, holding a white chalk and a staff. The villagers gathered to hear the verdict. His voice carried across the compound, flat and final. The gods had spoken. Neddy must be sacrificed to appease them. If this was not done, drought would come to their farms. Famine would come to their homes. Death would come to their children. There was no other way. Chike felt something break inside him. He approached the elders one more time. He offered to give the snake a grand funeral with everything required. He promised to pay any fine they demanded. He begged them to find another solution, but they shook their heads. The rules were ancient and clear. A stranger who intentionally killed a sacred snake could not be forgiven with money or ceremonies. The gods demanded blood for blood. His father led him back into the house as darkness fell. Chike sat alone in his room, staring at the walls. He felt angry at himself for not warning Neddy. He felt angry at the village for holding on to beliefs that made no sense to his modern mind. He felt trapped between two worlds. His parents came to him later that night. His father spoke with a heavy voice, saying that some things were beyond their control. What the gods demanded must be given. His mother wiped tears from her eyes, but nodded in agreement. They truly believed there was no other choice. But Chike could not accept it. He thought about calling the police from the city. They could come and stop this. But the nearest police station was 3 hours away on bad roads. By the time they arrived, it might already be too late. The sacrifice could happen at dawn. He needed to act now. As his parents slept, Chike made his decision. He would not let Neddy die for a mistake born of ignorance. He waited until the village grew quiet. He waited until the moon rose high. Then he slipped out of his father's house and moved through the shadows toward the custody house. 2 guards sat outside the entrance, but exhaustion had won over duty. They slept with their backs against the wall. Chike stepped past them carefully and entered the room. He whispered her name. Neddy woke immediately, her eyes wide with fear and relief. Without words, they understood what needed to happen. They moved quickly and quietly out the back way. They took the small path that led through the cassava farm toward the main road. By the time they reached the road leading to the city, the first hint of dawn was touching the sky. When morning came, the guards woke to find Neddy gone. They jumped to their feet and ran to alert the elders. Within minutes, the news spread through the village like wildfire. The elders rushed to Chike's house with angry faces. They found his parents sitting outside, looking confused and worried. Both Chike and Neddy had disappeared in the night. Chike's father swore he did not know where they went. His mother shook her head repeatedly, saying they had been asleep and heard nothing. The elders searched the house anyway, looking in every room, but found no trace of the young couple. Panic gripped the village. Some villagers shouted in anger, saying the gods would punish them all now. Others grabbed their machetes and formed search parties. They went into the surrounding bush, checking every path, every hiding spot they could think of. They searched until the sun was high overhead. They found nothing. The elders called an emergency meeting. They stood in the village square with grave faces, telling everyone to prepare for the worst. The sacrifice had not been made. The abomination remained unpunished. Now they could only wait for the gods' anger to fall upon them. Days passed slowly. The villagers watched the sky nervously, waiting for signs of drought. They checked their crops every morning, expecting to find them withered and dead. Mothers held their children closer, fearing sickness would come, but nothing happened. Instead, something unexpected occurred. On the 5th day after Neddy's escape, heavy clouds gathered in the sky. Rain fell on Achara for the first time in weeks. It was good rain, steady and soaking, the kind that made crops grow strong. The villagers stood in their doorways, watching the rain with confused faces. More days passed. The crops in the farms grew greener and healthier than they had been in months. The village well that had been running low filled up again. Children played outside without falling sick. Everything seemed fine. Better than fine. The village was flourishing. The elders gathered again, this time with puzzled expressions instead of angry ones. They whispered among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. Why were the gods silent? Why had no punishment come? Elder Okonkwo suggested they consult the chief priest again. The chief priest went into the shrine alone. He stayed there for 2 full days, fasting and praying, seeking answers from the gods. The entire village waited anxiously for his return. When he finally emerged, his face looked different, softer somehow, less certain. He called the villagers together and spoke in a quieter voice than before. He said he had received a message from the gods. The girl Neddy had acted out of ignorance, not malice. She came from a place where their customs were unknown. She had no knowledge of what the snakes meant to Achara. The gods had looked into her heart and found it pure. She meant to protect, not to offend. Because of this, the gods had chosen mercy over punishment. The villagers stood in silence, absorbing these words. Some looked relieved, others looked skeptical, but no one could argue with the evidence before their eyes. The village was thriving, not suffering. Word of the chief priest's message traveled beyond Achara. Someone who knew someone who traded in the city managed to get word to Chike. The message was simple: he could return home. He needed to come back and perform cleansing rituals for what had happened, but his life was not in danger. The rituals could include Nedi if she was willing to come. Chike received the message with mixed feelings. Relief washed over him knowing they were safe, but when he told Nedi about returning to the village, her face went pale. She shook her head firmly. She said she would never go back to Achara. The fear she felt in that custody house, waiting to be sacrificed for killing a snake, had marked her deeply. She could not forget it. She would not risk it again. Chike understood. He did not push her. He had seen the terror in her eyes during those hours. He had felt the weight of those ancient beliefs crushing down on both of them. He could not blame her for refusing. So Chike went back to Achara alone. His parents embraced him with tears in their eyes. The village gathered to watch as the chief priest performed the cleansing rituals. Chike brought a goat for sacrifice. He knelt in the shrine while the priest marked his forehead with white chalk and spoke prayers to appease the ancestors. He poured libations on the ground where the snake had died. The rituals took 3 days. When it was finished, Chike thanked the elders and said goodbye to his parents. He promised to visit them, but he would not be staying. He had made his choice. He returned to the city and found Nedi waiting for him. Together, they traveled to her village in her home state. There, surrounded by her family and traditions that made sense to both of them, they performed the marriage rites. Her people welcomed Chike with happiness. There were no sacred snakes, no threat of sacrifice, just celebration and joy. Back in Achara, something had shifted. The incident with Nedi planted a seed of doubt in the minds of some villagers, especially the younger ones who had seen Chike grow up and leave for the city. They began asking quiet questions. If the gods could show mercy to an ignorant stranger, were the old laws as absolute as they had always believed? If the village could flourish without the sacrifice, what did that mean about their understanding of the gods' will? The elders still maintained the traditions, the snakes still moved freely through the village, but the grip of absolute certainty had loosened just a little. Reality had crept in through the cracks, showing them that perhaps the world was more complicated than their ancestors had taught them. The old ways remained, but they were no longer unquestionable. And in a village like Achara, that small change was